I want to welcome you for this weekly devotional from Dora Church of Christ. I began thinking this morning and have had a great deal of thought over the past several months on the things that are happening in this world. As we look out and we look around us, the pains that people are facing, the difficulties, the trials, many heartaches. Maybe because we're just now beginning to recognize them. Maybe because they're more publicized now. Uh, Maybe because we have more availability to reach each other quickly with news and information. But for whatever it might be, in my mind, it is something that, or in my eyes, it's something that I am seeing more and more of. The difficulties of life, the situations that occur. How how do we handle them? How do we see about other people? In John, the 13th chapter, in verse 34, Jesus, before he faces the cross, he talking to his disciples, and he said, "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another just as I have loved you. You also are to love one another. By this, people will know that you are my disciples if you love or have love for one another." This idea of looking to others and seeing them, those who are close to us, those, as he's talking of here, are brothers in Christ. That having that love for each other, even though sometimes we disagree, even though we sometimes don't uh, uh, like the situation we're in, maybe a personalities clash, maybe we just don't fit together, and yet still having the love for one another. As a child of God, Jesus called for us to love. So often we have difficulty with this idea. But he says in Matthew, the 22nd chapter, verses 36 through 38, "Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law?" And he said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the greatest or the great and first commandment." We understand this idea to love God. But he says, but the second is like it. And the second is like unto it or is similar. He said, "You shall love your neighbors yourself." This becomes a little more difficult. To love my neighbors myself, that person I have nothing in common with, that person maybe who is an enemy or who is against me. He said, on these two commandments depend the law and the prophets. He said, on these two commandments are the whole of what the old book, old law was about. It's even more of what this new covenant with Christ is about, to love our neighbor, to have compassion on them. And I don't know if we've ever thought about this idea, but we can say love and we can talk about love all we want to talk about love, and yet it means absolutely nothing as a verbiage to say I love you, to say I care about you, to say I have a feeling for you. They become absolute worthless words unless there's something to go with them. As a child of God, so often I have listened to people say, "Oh, I love you. I love you. My heart is with you," and yet nothing happens. Now, I understand there are times that is about all that we can offer to someone, and yet it becomes so commonplace that maybe we have forgotten what it really means to say, "I love you." In 1 Peter 3, verse 8, we're going to read two versions in this, and I read out of the English Standard Version. But in chapter 3, verse 8 of First Peter, he said, finally, all of you have unity of mind, sympathy, brotherly love, a tender heart, a humble mind. Do not repay evil for evil or reviling for reviling, but on the contrary, bless, for to this you will call that you may obtain a blessing. When we think about that, and maybe it's a little harder to follow there unless we really think about it. But out of the NIV, to read the same verse may give us a little more understanding of what he has just said. He said, finally, all of you live in harmony with one another, be sympathetic, love as brothers, be compassionate and humble. Do not repay evil with evil or insult for insult, but with blessing, but with blessing, because to this you were called, so that you may inherit a blessing. You see what he says there. He calls for us to love one another, to be sympathetic, love as brothers, be compassionate and humble. This idea of being a servant, being compassionate, seeing a need and willing to be there for that need, willing to give yourself to try and help, comfort, or try and seek to do the things that it takes so that that one that you're working with feels loved. That they know that there's still love out in this world, that people still are concerned about them. You see, right now we live in a world that is full of hatred, it's full of distrust, it's full of all kinds of things. And seldom do people really see someone helping them. As we go about this week, as we look around us, we see people around us, never take into the idea and think, well, they're just acting hurt. They do this. Or we look at them and we say, they really don't deserve anything more. We do not know what is occurring in another person's life. Whether it is real to us or not, it's very real to them. The hurts and the pains, the suffering. He said Jesus had compassion. Look to those people. Seek to give them what you might be able to help them understand that there are those who still carry the love of God in their heart. They still care about people. They still want to give and offer themselves so that others might have some kind of comfort. So as you go about this week, I want you to think about this idea of showing compassion, really letting the love of God show in your life as you approach other people, as you help them, as you seek to offer them the kindness that God would offer you. I want to thank you so much for being here today, and may God bless.